Fasting and natural diet should be the first treatment when someone discovers that she or he has a medical problem. Dr. Joel Fuhrman, MD.
The reality is, if you ask people to give up basically everything they eat and instead adopt what they know they should eat but don't, it can take a little bit of a transition. In fact, for some people, it's so overwhelming that they need a little help to do it. And that's why we have places like the True North Health Center where people can come in an inpatient setting, get intense education, appropriate medical supervision, and make this transition. And perhaps the easiest way to make that transition can be actually medically supervised therapeutic fasting. Put people on a water-only fast for a limited period of time, and their taste themselves literally change. So what goes from being disgusting, tasteless swill goes to being rather acceptable food in a relatively short period of time. So there are a lot of tricks available to help people make this transition, but I don't think anybody can pretend it's not a major effort on the part of the patient when they decide it's time to get healthy.
Hello, and welcome back to I Thrive, rising from the depths of diabetes and obesity. I'm your host, John McMahon. I'm morbidly obese and a type 2 diabetic on a quest to find the truth about diabetes and obesity, make a plan, and execute a radical lifestyle turnaround. In the process, I found my purpose and decided to do a documentary on this journey to share and inspire others along the way. Thank you for joining us for episode 8. From fasting to reconnecting, essential tools for an I Thrive lifestyle. In our last episode, we learned from Dr. Pompa how environment can wreak havoc on our cellular metabolism. In this episode, we'll learn about our body's almost magical defense to toxins and diseases like diabetes and obesity. Fasting.
Fasting has been used for centuries. I mean, this is nothing new. And philosophically, it makes sense. Because you have to understand, humans were never designed to be eating 24/7. It's only within the last 100 years we even had the technical capacity to do that. That we've not had grocery stores around for 200 years. We haven't. So there were times regularly in all our ancient ancestors where food was simply unavailable. And that scenario exists in large parts of the world today. That for scarcity and lack of resources, people don't have access to food. And actually, so that is our historical perspective. So wouldn't it make sense to believe that our genes, our metabolic machinery, are optimized for that experience? They're not optimized to be eating 24/7. And that if we violated that optimization strategy or protocol, that we're going to have metabolic consequences, which are going to damage our long-term health and cause us problems in health and suffering, needless suffering. So it's, you know, and even more recently if you follow some countries' health patterns after wars, like World War II, where they had, because of the war, there was relative famines for large parts of the population. Food simply wasn't available. And you look at what happens to their health long term, it dramatically improves because they went through this process I described earlier, which is regularly they were doing autophagy and mitophagy. They were cleaning their cellular machinery up. There's nothing you can do. It's like, it's spring cleaning. You've got to take out the garbage. What the hell would happen to your community, where you live, if you just put the garbage in the street and no one picked it up? You can imagine what a disaster that would be. And just extend that analogy a step further and imagine that community is your body. And you're putting out the trash regularly, but nothing's cleaning it up. The way you clean it up is you fast, and your body will take care of everything automatically, no charges. It does it by itself. You know, this intermittent fasting approach is an intervention that you do to get yourself healthy. But even if you're normal weight like me, intermittent fasting and regular multi-day water fast are a powerful strategy because they initiate a metabolic process in your body called autophagy or mitophagy. And autophagy means, auto means self, and phagos or phagy means eating. So your body starts eating itself. And I would say, why is that good? Well, because your cells get damaged. I mean, that's just the artifact of growing older. They get damaged and messed up. And your body has to have some mechanism of removing these damaged cells from your body and your tissues. And if it doesn't, it's going to clog up the works and you will have problems. So when you're fasting, there's no other exogenous external fuel source, then your body's going to look for things that it can chew up. And this is the coolest thing, because there are people who weigh who are massively overweight, 100, 200, 300 pounds overweight. And if they go on a very low-calorie diet, they'll have all these excess skin folds, and I'm sure you've probably seen those in pictures. But what's interesting, that if that person, instead of going on a very low-calorie diet, went on a fasting approach, guess what? No excess skin folds. You know why? Because the body eats the unnecessary tissue. And that's just the visible, external, cosmetic approach. Can you possibly imagine what's going on in a tissue basis? You have damaged tissues. In many cases from diabetes, one of the most profound macroscopic challenge is that your liver becomes infiltrated with fat, which impairs its function, and your pancreas too. And you develop something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD. And when you're fasting, that reverses, it disappears, it goes back to normal. And that's just one example, but there's so many others. Your stem cells start to improve. Your brain gets better. There's plaque in your body. I mean, your brain that leads to Alzheimer's, or at least is associated with Alzheimer's disease. And that plaque is made out of proteins. And guess what? Your body starts breaking down when you're not eating. So that's why, even being ideal body weight myself, I will regularly, at this point I'm playing with it, but once a month I go on a 4-day water fast. And I am not using it to lose weight. The last thing I want to do is lose weight. But it's such a powerful strategy. In fact, it's the most profoundly powerful metabolic intervention that I know of, is fasting. Certainly for diabetes, but even for if your intention, like mine, is for ultimately improving your longevity and your total health, is to implement this strategy. I think you can't go wrong. And the beautiful thing about this, especially if you've implemented intermittent fasting, that the hunger pains disappear. There's no hunger, there's no cravings. You don't want junk food, you want to go out for food. And the mental clarity improves. And the beautiful thing when you're fasting is that you have extra time. And you know what? It saves you money. You don't have to buy food. You don't have to store the food. You don't have to prepare it. You don't have to eat it. You don't have to clean up. So you've got a minimum of an hour to 3 extra hours a day, every day you're fasting. And so what good is it if I'm laying on my bed because I don't have any energy? If you're doing it the right way, your energy goes through the roof. Your mental clarity increases like you were when you were a child. And it's the most profoundly beneficial strategy you can have. And as I said, it doesn't cost you anything. It's not like I'm trying to sell you something. You're saving money. There's nothing to buy. One of my mentors, who I have enormous respect for, and I believe is the world-class expert in this, is Dr. Jason Fung, F-U-N-G. He's a nephrologist out of the University of Toronto in Canada. And he, if you're watching this, you probably know that Canada is socialized medicine. So he's handcuffed in many ways and really couldn't allow his dietary team to treat his nephrology patients. That have most of his patients are there as a result of diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes. He couldn't teach them the diet because the nutritional staff wouldn't cooperate. So he wisely came up with, he's a very pragmatic clinician, and he said, okay, we're going to fast you.
I started to look at the field of obesity medicine, and truthfully, it was a real mess. The whole idea that we should be counting calories was just not viable. That is, it sounds good in theory, but in practice, it was a complete failure. So again, one of the things that is always very interesting to me is that if you look at these sort of success rates, like failure rates of 99%, imagine you had a classroom of 100 kids, and one of them fails. Well, you might say that's the problem child, he doesn't study or whatever. But now you imagine you have a situation where 99 kids fail out of 100. And then you say, well, it's the kid's fault. Well, I don't think so. It's the teacher's fault. That's the real problem. And I think that that's where we have to look at things, saying that, well, the failing was not in all the people who followed the advice. The failing was the advice itself. The advice itself was not good. Why it was not good is up for debate, but you have to face the fact and come up with a better plan. So one of the things that we really looked into was low carbohydrate diets, cutting out a lot of refined foods, and introducing the idea of intermittent fasting and even longer periods of fasting for the express purpose of making people healthier. The weight loss was important as well, but in the end, what we found was that we could actually significantly improve the health of people by using these nutritional interventions, these dietary interventions, to reduce the amount of medications that people ate, to reverse their type 2 diabetes, and hopefully down the line prevent them from having heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease, and the rest of it. So exercise is very interesting because there's no doubt that exercise is good for you, to get up, to walk and move around. But it's not the problem that is the key issue, the root cause of the type 2 diabetes. So remember, the problem with type 2 diabetes is that you have this sort of overstuffed liver that has too much carbohydrates, which is developing too much fat. You're developing too much fat around the organs. You can't really exercise your liver. When you run, you exercise your muscles, you don't exercise your liver. So you're not taking care of the problem. And again, the other problem is that a lack of exercise does not cause type 2 diabetes if you're eating the proper diet. So while it is helpful to help burn it off, it's actually highly inefficient. So for example, if we look at calories, simple calorie balance, because there is an overlap between the number of calories you take and the insulin effect. It's not a one-to-one effect, which means that if you eat a plate of brownies and an equal calorie amount of kale salad, they might be the same calories, but they don't have the same insulin effect. Therefore, they will not have the same stimulating effect for type 2 diabetes and obesity. Essentially, if the plate of brownies, which has a much higher insulin effect for the same amount of calories, is more fattening. Now, that's pretty obvious to anybody who has a brain. But the doctors will tell you, oh, it's all about the calories. It's like, okay, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're telling me these cookies and this salad are equally fattening. If that's what you're telling me, then I don't think you know what you're talking about. That's my reaction. So the whole problem is that if you look at the calories of exercise, so if you've ever gone on a treadmill and watched the calorie count, it goes up very, very slowly. So if you do a moderate amount of walking, say 30, 45 minutes at a moderate pace, which is really pretty decent exercise, you might burn like 100, 150 calories. That's compared to, say, 2,000 calories you might eat in a day. In other words, that's barely 4 to 5% of your total amount of energy that you're putting into your body. So if you're gonna work really, really hard, but you're only working on the 4%, then it's not very efficient. If you simply don't eat for a whole day, you will burn off 2,000 calories. If you exercise really hard, you'll burn off 150. Well, it's very, very different. That is to say, if you have a final exam and 5% of it is on, math and 95% is on English, you'd be an idiot to study, spend your time studying 50% math, 50% English. Of course, you study the part that's worth more. So the part that's worth more in type 2 diabetes, obesity is diet. And that's why we focus so incredibly, closely on the diet. And while exercise is good for so many different things, it's still a minor part. So in baseball, for example, you say, oh, well, bunting's an important part of the game. Well, sure it is, but you don't spend 50% of your time practicing your bunting and the other 50% on everything else. It would be ridiculous. That's the same sort of idea. So the reason that exercise gets promoted very heavily is really due to commercial interest. That is, people want the whole calorie notion is similarly one of these notions that's been really perpetuated by commercial interest, because the junk food companies, the ones who sell sugary beverages, they want you to believe that all calories are the same. So those calories of sugar are the same as the calories of kale salad. It's not the same. They want you to believe that you can eat all this bad food and exercise those calories off and you'll be the same. You won't be the same. All that sugar will go into your liver, you'll have stronger muscles, but your liver is damaged, you get type 2 diabetes. So you see all these athletes who had been sort of brainwashed over the decades into drinking sugary Gatorade and other sugary drinks because they thought they were fine because they're exercising so much. Some of them were, and some of them developed type 2 diabetes despite the fact that they were world-class athletes. It was ridiculous. We use intermittent fasting to let our bodies naturally burn off that sugar, because remember, there's not too much. It's not a problem of too little energy in your body. It's a problem of too much energy, and this is the thing that is important, because we go the wrong way. We tell people to eat all the time, eat 6 times a day, make sure you're eating all your carbs, and it doesn't make any sense. If you have a car and you fill it up with gas and your gas tank is full, now you have no room, but you still need to pump in the gas. Well, you pump it into your back seat. It's not great, but at least the gas is there. You'd say, wow, that's really bad. What am I going to do? What you wouldn't do is go back to that gas station 3 times a day and keep pumping in gas into your back seat. What you would do is, 1, stop pumping the gas into your car, and 2, drive that car so that it burns it all off. That's the solution, not keep going back 3 times a day. In fact, we tell people to go eat 6 times a day. So fill up your car 6 times a day with gas because you have too much gas. Are you crazy? That's why we're not getting better, because we're actually doing everything to make the problem worse, because we never understood the problem in the first place. So once you understand the problem, you can do things like low carbohydrate diets, intermittent fasting, and even longer term fasting. And guess what? As soon as you do that, people start to get better, almost miraculously. We've had people here who have been on 35 years of type 2 diabetes, 11 years of insulin, and we got them off all their insulin in 3 months. It was ridiculous how quickly they got better as soon as you start treating them correctly. And that's the whole point. It's a natural solution. We're not trying to give medications. We're not trying to do surgery. It's actually a completely natural solution to this problem. It's available to anybody in the world. It's completely free. That's amazing. We can prevent all of this disease, so the metabolic syndrome and everything that goes along with it, not to mention save people a lot of money on their drugs, but also prevent the heart attacks, the cancers, the strokes, the Alzheimer's disease, the kidney disease, all of it preventable for free, only with the knowledge of how to treat this disease naturally. It's amazing. Alzheimer's is a very, very interesting disease, and it's caused by these excess plaques and tangles. So this sort of excess protein that's sort of gumming up the brain and causing the failure of memory and so on. And it's one of these diseases that has been recognized very recently as also a metabolic problem. In fact, there's a lot of people that say it should be called type 3 diabetes, for example, just because it is so closely tied into the type 2 diabetes that it really should be considered part of that whole disease of too much sugar. One of the things that's very interesting is that there are protocols now that can reverse Alzheimer's, at least in the early stages. And what's interesting, of course, about it is that it has nothing to do with drugs. It's all about the diet, and one of the other things that's very fascinating is the prescribed period of fasting, to make sure that you allow your body that time to lower its insulin to start burning the food energy rather than storing it. Remember, the body exists only in one of two conditions. You're either storing fat or you're burning it. You cannot do both at the same time. So insulin is high, you store it; insulin is low, you burn it. If the problem is that you have too much food energy or fat, then you need to burn it. And it's as simple as that. You've got to get your insulin levels down. And when you do that, Alzheimer's seems to get much better as well. Understand that type 2 diabetes is about too much sugar in your body. Then you have to say, well, what can I do to get rid of this sugar? If that pill that you take does not help you get rid of the sugar, then it's not doing you any good in the long term. So if you take insulin, for example, which simply moves the sugar from the blood into the body, you're really hiding that sugar so you can't see it, but you've not made the problem any better. So it's like if you have garbage in the kitchen, and instead of throwing it out, you just throw it under the sink. So you hide the problem. Well, you can do that for a while, and then you can start throwing your garbage in the bathroom and under the bed and so on. But eventually the whole house starts to smell. That's the same idea. The problem with type 2 diabetes, too much sugar in your whole body. You got to get rid of it. Whether it means stop putting it in, or increase the excretion of it, increase the burning of it through intermittent fasting or exercise, for example, although fasting tends to be a lot more efficient, then that's what you have to do. If the medications that you take don't actually get rid of the sugar, then you're not going to get better. And that's one of the things that we figured out about 8 or 9 years ago. We did these very large studies of medications for type 2 diabetics, such as insulin, where we would shift that sugar from the blood into the body. That is the equivalent of taking the garbage and throwing it under the sink so you can't see it. When you do that, your doctor feels great because he's like, wow, look how clean your blood sugar is. Your blood sugar's nice and low. I'm doing a good job. But at the same time, the patient is getting worse and worse and worse. They get the same number of heart attacks, same number of strokes. Turns out that using medications to hide the sugar actually did nothing at all. Patients were not healthier at all. And that's really what forced people to start looking at these new paradigms of type 2 diabetes and realizing that very powerfully we could actually reverse this disease once we understand the disease. So bariatric surgery is very interesting because there are several different types of bariatric surgery. The first one, and probably still the gold standard, considered the best, is something called the Roux-en-Y bypass. So they do two things. One is they cut the stomach to the size of a walnut, and then they rewire the intestine so any food that does get through doesn't get absorbed properly. And one of the things that they found very quickly was that it was very successful at reversing type 2 diabetes, which is interesting because, one, it proves once again that type 2 diabetes is a reversible condition. It's not chronic, it's not progressive, we just got the treatment all wrong. But bariatric surgery actually reversed people. The other thing that was very interesting about it was that it reversed the type 2 diabetes extremely quickly. That is, somebody could go into bariatric surgery weighing 400 pounds with severe type 2 diabetes, and about 3 weeks later, they could be essentially non-diabetic and yet still weigh 380 pounds. So that was really interesting. And one of the things that people have to understand is that there's the reason why people got better. The main reason was that bariatrics is simply enforced fasting. So these people, after their surgery, they really can't eat much. And whatever they eat isn't getting absorbed anyway. So the body is now forced to burn off its own sugar and fat. Well, that's amazing. Because if you're burning off your sugar and fat, then the blood glucose goes down. If your blood glucose goes down, you don't need to take your insulin anymore. And that's why people got better so quickly. One of the things that became obvious is that it's actually not the total amount of fat in your body that causes the type 2 diabetes. It's actually the fat inside the organs that causes that problem. If you have fat inside a fat cell, that's okay because that's what the cell is supposed to do. But if you have a lot of fat within the liver and within the pancreas, well, that's not okay because those organs are not supposed to have fat. If you have fat inside the muscle, it's not okay because there's not supposed to be fat in muscles. What you see in a type 2 diabetic is that they have fat pretty much everywhere. So not only in their fat cells, but also within their liver, they have this huge fatty liver. Within their pancreas, they have this huge fatty pancreas, and they have fat inside the muscle. So fatty liver, fatty pancreas, and fatty muscle. And that's actually what causes the type 2 diabetes. Remember, it's an overflow paradox. So you're creating all this fat and you have nowhere to go. The fat cells are completely full. So now you have to start storing it in the organs where they're not supposed to. And as soon as you do that, you get the problems. So when you get the fat inside the muscles, what's the main reason that causes the fat inside the muscles? Is it just too much calories? Partly, but it's also the excess carbohydrate and excess glucose. You see this most easily in cattle, where the degree of marbling is actually the amount of fat within the muscle. So when you eat a piece of steak, if there's a lot of fat inside that steak, that's the muscle part of the animal. It shouldn't have a lot of fat. But we like it because it tastes very delicious when you have a lot of marbling. In fact, the more marbling, the more expensive the cut of beef. But the way to get that marbling is to feed these cattle grain, because the excess carbohydrate actually gets turned very quickly into fat. Sugar is another easy way to create this fatty muscle, this fatty liver. So again, for example, if you look at geese, foie gras is the fatty liver of a goose or a duck. What they do is they force feed these ducks high starch corn mash. So again, a lot of excess refined carbohydrates. What happens is that your body takes these excess carbohydrates, insulin goes up very high, and then your liver actually can't store that much carbohydrates. So it turns this carbohydrate into fat, and the process is called de novo lipogenesis. As the liver creates all this fat, it starts sending it out to the body. And it's sending it out so fast that the normal fat cells, which are supposed to take it up, can't take it up. So then you start to get this fatty muscle, you get this fatty liver, and then this fatty pancreas. Remember, as the liver starts to get distended with fat, it can't take in the glucose anymore. So you see this as insulin resistance, and that's one of the reasons why fatty liver is so closely tied in to the entire metabolic syndrome, because it's really a disease of too much sugar. Your liver has taken all this sugar, turned into fat, gotten this huge fatty liver, but now it can't take any more sugar in because it's full already. And that's the whole problem. Fatty liver was a disease that essentially did not exist. Nobody really knew about it in the 1980s. It was only described in the late 70s, 80s. And now it's going to be the most common cause of liver disease overall, excluding, say, alcohol in certain parts of the world, and certainly in North America, one of the leading causes of liver failure. So not only is diabetes causing heart failure, kidney failure, strokes, cancer, but it's also the leading cause of liver failure in North America. So really important problems. But again, bariatric surgery is a solution, and we have studies to prove that bariatric surgery does very well to reverse this. But it does this by forcing you to burn off your excess food energy. The problem with bariatric surgery is not that it doesn't work, but there's a lot of surgical complications, and there's a lot of cost to it. It's very expensive. Lots of people can't afford it. If you get all the benefits of bariatric surgery from not eating, from fasting, why don't you simply fast and save yourself the surgery? Is it easy? No, it's not easy. For sure, it's not easy. But if we give people the right information and give people the support that they need, then lots of people can do it. And this is the thing that people always tell me, oh, people won't do it, people won't do it. But in my intensive dietary management program, we have thousands of people who do it. We have 80-year-olds who will fast days and days and days and have no problem with it. Why? Because it's something that our body has the ability to do. We store fat for a reason. Remember that fat is only stored food energy. That's what it's there for. It's not there for looks. It's stored because it's food energy for you to use when you don't eat. So when you don't eat, it's completely natural and normal for you to burn those fat stores that are making you sick. So here's a solution that is in essence gives you all the benefits of the bariatric surgery without the surgery, without the cost, without the complications, and completely free. Yes, people need support to do it. They need some information on how to do it and all that sort of thing, and that's the sort of information we provide in our program. But the point is this: people tell me, oh, they won't do it. Nobody's going to do it. Well, it's like, that's not my job to tell people what they will and won't do. My job is to tell people what they need to do to get healthier. If it means fasting on a regular basis, if that's what they need to get better, I won't tell people you can't do it. I'll tell people this is what you need to do. Let me help you do it. That's my job as a doctor. It's not to say that I have a great solution for you to reverse your dietary condition that is free, that is natural, that will get you off medications, will save you money, but I think you can't do it. That's not my job. My job is to say, this is what you need to do, let me help you do it. And if it means putting in a program like our IDM program, then it means putting that in. The long-term problems with bariatric surgery are that while there is a temporary solution created, eventually the stomach starts to stretch, so you can start to eat again. And if you haven't learned the proper way to eat, and you go back to the diet that gave you obesity and type 2 diabetes, you will get it again. So at best, it's a temporizing solution, a little band-aid solution. What is really necessary is for people to understand what caused it so that they can prevent it from happening again. That's not even including all the other complications. So there's lots of complications. So there's scarring. Some people get this chronic narrowing because of scar tissue in their stomach. So actually they keep throwing up. Not getting the proper nutrition afterwards. Now they do take steps, of course, to give you vitamins and so on, but there's that's a lot of problems. They get this dumping syndrome where the nutrients, because they've rewired the intestines, because it's moving around too fast, they get this flushing and sometimes vomiting. So there's lots and lots of complications because you've taken a normal stomach and normal intestines, you cut out a huge piece of the normal stomach and rewired normal intestines so that they are abnormal. And it's like, but it's not necessary. We can do the same thing for free starting tomorrow if we want to. And that's the whole point. Not to say that bariatric surgery is bad, as of everything else. There's going to be people who need it, but it's not really for all of us. It's not really a procedure that we all should be doing. Because remember, you're taking normal stomach and cutting it out. Well, there's a reason that stomach is there. And it's not something that's chronic and inevitable. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, we had the same stomachs and the same intestines and we did fine. The difference was the diet. The difference was the foods that we ate and the fact that nobody really does the fasting anymore. And this is one of the things that I found very interesting when I started looking at fasting as a therapeutic tool, was that the immediate reaction was that it was really, really bad for you. And this is very interesting because humans have the ability to store food energy. So when you're not eating, you take food energy and you burn it. That is your fat stores or your sugar stores, you'll just burn it. That's the reason you don't die in your sleep every single night. So simply by letting yourself digest this food, you will prevent the fat from being stored on your body to make you sick. Nothing is more logical, yet as soon as I started talking about this, there's so many doctors that thought, oh, that's really bad, your metabolism will go down, this and that. And it turns out they were all myths. People have been fasting for thousands of years without problems. You have a solution that is completely natural, yet all the health professionals that I dealt with were saying, you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't do it. Instead, take your insulin, which will make you gain weight, and you'll have your diabetes. And by the way, the success rate of this sort of approach is just about 0%. So it was very interesting because the fasting is a tool, because remember, and life is about balance. So there's balance between feeding and fasting. And if you feed, your insulin goes up, you store food energy. When you fast, insulin goes down, you burn food energy. So the key to good health is balance. It's not too much of one, it's not too much of the other. The problem these days is that we've gone too far into the feeding side of things. So if you look at the number of calories that people eat, it's more than usual, but not more than that. It's about how often people eat. If you look at studies from nationwide surveys, so the NHANES survey was done in 1977, and what it showed was that people ate on average 3 meals a day. So I grew up in the 70s, it was breakfast, lunch, dinner. If you tried to get an after-school snack, your mom would say, no, you're going to ruin your dinner. If you tried to get a bedtime snack, they'd say no. If you tried to eat in the car, they'd say, get out. So snacking was not considered acceptable in any way. Now you go to 2005, 2006, and the average number of times people eat a day is 6. That is, on average, it's breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack. And we think this is a good thing. It's like, but how is it good? If you eat more times in a day and you eat more total food, you're going to gain weight because that's just the way it is. So why would you tell people to eat 6 times a day? You should be telling them to eat less times a day, because as you don't eat, your body is forced to burn off that sugar, which is causing the diabetes. If you simply take that to its logical conclusion, all you have to do is extend the fasting periods, and now you have a powerful therapeutic tool to treat type 2 diabetes instead of medications, but one that is completely free and completely natural. If you understand that the main problem in type 2 diabetes is the too much sugar, and it's too much insulin, which is driving all this storage of that, then you can say that, well, if the problem is too much insulin, how am I going to lower my insulin? So one of the easy ways to do that is to reduce the carbohydrates in the diet. But there really are a lot of different types of carbohydrates, and some which will have a strong insulin effect and some that won't. So the ones you really have to avoid are the refined processed carbohydrates. So if you take something such as white bread, for example, it's not natural. It's not a natural product. You've taken the wheat berry, you've taken off all the fiber, you've taken off all the fat, and really left a product that is very highly concentrated in glucose, and then you crush it into a very fine powder, which lets your body absorb it super quick. So we know that when you crush stuff into a powder, it gets absorbed. So if you think about illicit drugs like cocaine, for example, there's a reason they crush it into powder, because it gets absorbed very quickly, unnaturally quickly. The same happens when you grind flour in one of these new mechanical processing plants. It gets ground into very fine powder. If you throw flour in the air, for example, you get this big cloud of dust, because it's a very, very fine powder. As opposed to, say, a wheat berry, which is a giant berry. So when you absorb that glucose so quickly, it's a bit unnatural, and your insulin level spikes very high. And the problem with type 2 diabetes is too much insulin. So those refined carbohydrates are not that good for you. On the other hand, you have carbohydrates, the sort of unprocessed carbohydrates, a lot of leafy vegetables, even some of the more starchy vegetables that have a lot of fiber, a lot of bulk, are unprocessed. Remember, they're not ground into a fine powder, so the rise in glucose is much slower, and the fiber actually acts sort of like an antidote to this, in that it slows down the absorption of it, the glucose doesn't rise as quickly, and therefore the insulin doesn't rise as quickly. So when you compare the glycemic index, which is an index of how high your blood glucose goes, which is a good proxy for how high your blood insulin goes, with carbohydrate containing foods, what you find is that the processed carbohydrates are very, very high insulin effect, and the unprocessed carbohydrates have very, very low insulin effect. So therefore, if you're eating carbohydrates, then you should choose the sort of whole unprocessed carbohydrates, a lot of leafy vegetables, but other unprocessed carbohydrates, and maybe avoid the sort of refined cereals, the breakfast cereals, and of course, sugar is really the main problem. I think you can still get nutrition by eating plant foods if you like. You can get them from animal foods as well, but these micronutrients in plants, there's nothing wrong with eating a plant-based diet, actually. It's really about the insulin effect. So eating a plant-based diet that is sort of white bread, sugar, and French fries is not good. If you eat a whole plant-based diet based on lots of leafy vegetables and unprocessed carbohydrates, you can do very well. So in fact, you can look at places like Okinawa where they ate mostly sweet potato, a lot of unprocessed foods, but very high in carbohydrates. They did fine. What they're not eating, a lot of sugar, and they're not eating any processed foods. So you have to be aware that I'm not against carbohydrates per se. You can do very well with carbohydrates. It's really the insulin effect. So the insulin effect depends on two things. One is the processing that goes into it. And two is the frequency of how you eat. If you look at traditional societies, or even go back to 1970s America, you're eating 3 times a day. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Okay, you're eating from say 8 in the morning to 6 at night. 10 hours, maybe 12 hours of eating, 12 hours of fasting. Great, you're nicely in balance. Now, the minute we get up, people say, oh, you gotta start eating and keep eating until you go to bed. It's like, well, now you went from say 7 a.m. when you woke up, somebody told you that the minute you wake up, you gotta start shoving like food in your mouth, till like 11 p.m. Now all of a sudden you're spending your whole day feeding and no fasting, and you're completely out of balance. And then you wonder why that you're getting sick. It's because you haven't balanced the feeding and the fasting. So again, if you look at it simplistically, all you need to do is put that back in balance. How? Well, if you had too much feeding, you need to do more fasting, and that will put you back in balance. In our intensive dietary management program, we have 2 key components to it. One of them is dietary, so we provide dietary advice to people. The one thing is we follow a strict low carbohydrate diet, but again, keeping in mind that it's really a low insulin diet. Refined carbohydrates are really what we try to avoid, not the leafy vegetables and so on, the little bit of carbohydrates you get from that. But really it's trying to stick to whole foods, unprocessed foods, nothing sort of man-made. So that also applies to the oils, the man-made sort of vegetable oils. And the other thing that we do is, more than anybody else in the world, is we use intermittent fasting. So we harness the body's own ability to burn off this glucose and this fat, and we use it to our advantage to make people healthier. So remember that fasting is simply the absence of eating. So you can drink water, you can drink herbal teas, coffee, and sometimes for longer ones we use bone broth and so on. And during that time, what you have to think about is that you're letting your body burn off the food energy that it's stored from before, which is your body fat. In essence, what we're telling the clients to do is to eat their own body fat. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not easy, it's not fun, but it can make you healthier. So you can do, so there's different regimens you can do. You can do shorter daily fasts for say 16, 18, 20 hours, and that would be most days of the week. You can do longer fasts, a little bit less frequently, 24, 30, 36 hours every other day, for example. And you can do longer fasts like 5 days, 7 days, and so on. The longer it is, the more powerful it is, but the more you have to be careful in terms of your medication. So the other part is that we closely monitor people, and we work with them. I work with them as a physician to adjust their medications and monitor their blood work so that we make sure that we're not running into any problems, because there are problems that do come into play. So in our online program for the IDM, of course, I can't treat everybody, so they have to work with their own physician, and we provide the dietary guidance. But because we have so much experience using intermittent fasting, extended fasting, people can get the guidance that they really need. Because in old days, so if you look at religious fasting, for example, people used to fast for a long time. So Ramadan is the holy month in Islamic tradition, and they fast. During Lent, people used to fast. In Greek Orthodox tradition, people used to fast. And it was easy because everybody was doing it. And if you had a problem, your mom would know what to do about it. Now, nobody fasts and nobody knows what to do. So there's headaches, there's constipation, there's cramps, there's all these little things that can come up, and we can help people with that. The other component that's very important is that we provide sort of a supportive environment for the low carbohydrate diets for the fasting. And that's very important because you don't want to feel like you're out there on your own, doing it on your own. If you look at any of the behavior change programs, whether it's Weight Watchers or Alcoholics Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous, it's much more powerful to do it in a group because then you have that peer support. In school, of course, you get peer pressure to conform. Here it's peer support to, conform so that you can get healthier. And it turns out that that's very, very important because it's hard to do stuff by yourself. If you think you're the only guy out there doing it and nobody else in the world is doing it and everybody tells you you're crazy to do it, well, you're going to fail. That's just the way it is. But if you're out there and everybody's saying, good for you, you're doing great, and the fasting is hard, but hey, we're here for you if you need us, if you need to talk, if you need to do this, you need to do that. So that sort of supportive environment is something that we use extensively to help people with the fasting. So between the low carbohydrate diets and the supportive environment and the medical sort of intervention, which you can get with your own doctor, now you create the potential for people to completely reverse their diabetes. And by reversing their obesity, their type 2 diabetes, you can impact their life by preventing all these downstream events. And people can do it by themselves as well. They don't have to come into the program. They can read about it. They can go on the blog. They can go on listen to the podcast. They can do any of that and simply work themselves and there's Facebook groups and there's other support groups online. So you can do it completely for free. And that's so powerful because now what we're doing is we're empowering people to take back their own health. You don't have to go to the doctor to get better. You can get the proper information on this video, online, through support groups. As long as you have that basic knowledge, you can take that information and take control of your own health. All of a sudden, you're in charge. It's not like you going to the doctor and say, okay, tell me what drug I need, tell me what surgery I need, tell me what I got now. It's like, I'm taking control, I'm gonna beat it, and that's so important to people, and that's why we do it, to really give people the information that they need to take control of their own life, because really diabetes has the ability to wreck your whole life. So we see this every single day. It's funny for me to hear people say that type 2 diabetes is not reversible because every single day I come into the office, I see it. For example, one of the people we treated, he was a young fellow, 50-something years old. He had been called type 2 diabetic for I think 25 years. He had started on insulin and basically was resigned to continuing it for the rest of his life. So he was on 70 units a day and had been on that for 5 or 6 years. So we explained the whole process to him. We explained the fasting. We explained the low carbohydrate diets. We explained why it would work so that people are not in the dark about why these sort of interventions work. Within a month, we had him off all his diabetic medications. When we checked his 3-month average of blood sugars, it was in the non-diabetic range. So you went from a fellow with 30 years of type 2 diabetes, in a few months, we had him off all his medications and his blood sugars were at a level where he would be classified as non-diabetic. Now the key is to keep people on it, because if they go back to the diet that gave them diabetes, they will get it again. What was very interesting was that his sister also had type 2 diabetes and looked at him, was talking to him like amazed. So she was on 3 different type 2 diabetic medications. She's like, I'm joining too. So she comes in and she was on a couple of blood pressure medications, cholesterol. So she was on 6 or 7 medications. So again, we did the same thing. We explained it to them, started on the fasting regimen, started with a low carbohydrate diet. Within 2 months, she was off all 6 of her medications. And she was so happy about it. She was like amazed that something so simple that they can do themselves had the power to reverse it. And 2 of the family, 2 of these family members, in 10 years, they would have been looking at eye disease, kidney disease, nerve damage, the whole thing. So this is the power that we have to make lives better by providing the proper nutrition and fasting, which is not about nutrition, but restoring that balance between feeding and fasting, because we've fallen out of balance. We can increase the fasting to put ourselves back in that balance. And it can take a lot, because we're trying to reverse 10, 20, 30 years of certain dietary habits when we've been told to eat lots of carbs and eat 6 times a day. So we're putting crackers, we're eating bagels all day and wondering why we're gaining weight and getting type 2 diabetes. So it can take a lot of fasting to get to that point, but when we explain what we're doing, people can get better.
So the key is, the key takeaways, the first is to understand what type 2 diabetes actually is actually too much sugar, both glucose and fructose, too much sugar in the body. So if you understand that that's the real disease, then the cure, the treatment, is to get rid of all that excess sugar in the body. So there's several things: low carbohydrate diets, reducing the amount of refined foods, refined carbohydrates, but especially sugar. It doesn't matter about the calories, it's really about the sugar. And then adding back that intermittent fasting or even extended fasting. So if you think about the what it takes, the average weight loss for 1 day of fasting is only half a pound of fat. So a pound of fat is roughly 3,500 calories. If you're eating 1,800 or 2,000 calories a day, it's half a pound of fat per day. So if you think about it, and you need 50 pounds of weight or 80 pounds of weight, then that's like 100 to 200 days of fasting. That's like half a year practically that you need to do. Now you don't want to all do it at once. There's different regimens, but one of the things to really consider along with your physician, because you do need to adjust your medications. Anytime you adjust your diet, you have to adjust your medications, because those medications for diabetes are based on what you're currently eating. If you're changing what you're eating, you need to talk to your physician about changing that. But then you can do things like short intermittent fast, so alternate daily fasting, where you eat kind of every other day, or throwing in some longer fasts like 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, where you don't eat anything, just drink water and let your body eat that fat. Is it hard? Yeah, it's not easy. There's so much temptation all around us, the smells, the McDonald's here and Dunkin' Donuts here and Starbucks here. There's lots of temptation. It's difficult, but at the same time, what's really difficult is heart attacks, heart failure, dialysis, blindness. You want to talk hard, that's hard. And if you develop that, there will be nothing you can do at that point. The damage is done. You can only prevent these problems. You can't reverse them. So what you'd have to do is really start a program such as that, where you have a set regimen, work it out with your doctor, what days you're gonna not eat, let your body burn off that sugar, and how to adjust the medications, make sure you're getting monitored for nutrient deficiency electrolytes, and kind of go from there.
Fantastic, thanks.
Yeah, all right.
Really appreciate it.
Okay, no problem.
I feel so blessed to be able to connect with all these experts who have been so genuine in their caring for people and so gracious with their time, and especially blessed to be able to share this experience with you. Like Dr. Fung, who gave me some great advice on what would help my feet heal the fastest. I'll give you 3 guesses as to what he said. A 14-day water fast. I wish I could have. I wish I would have. Following is a clip of a tough moment on my journey. Not to be self-indulgent, but to anyone out there that thinks that they're alone and can't make the necessary changes and realize that they're not alone and they can have a thriving life. Then we'll close with Dr. Dean Ornish, finding our reason why we want to live. Could the real root cause of our compulsions and chronic diseases be rooted in our need for love and connection? All right. Well, I'm here in Las Vegas at the Chef AJ Ultimate Weight Loss live event. Just wrapping up Sunday night, started Friday night with the meet and greet, which was great, and then all day, from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Saturday and Sunday. The education was incredible. The inspirational stories are incredible, and this was definitely the right place to come. I'm completely exhausted and a little overwhelmed, and with just the task of putting this documentary together and the volume of information out there. I've still got to change the bandages on my feet. You can see I got my little bandage all set up over there, ready to go, and still hobbling around, and these shoes are exhausting. After a while, they're got to be at least 5 pounds each. And then they put you back on your heels, so I'm walking like a penguin everywhere. I don't have a camera crew. I don't know if you could see. Not very flexible. So I don't have a camera crew, sound guy. I don't have a driver, transportation. I don't have a production assistant organizing all my travel. I don't have a lighting guy doing my lights. And I don't have a history of even doing this. I just had some gracious friends that are in the business that just showed me a few things to be able to get this done in a professional way. And I think the meat of the content is really what my intention is, to move and inspire other people with my journey and to be vulnerable at times like this. And this is being vulnerable. Tonight I'm down. I'm a little miserable, overwhelmed. I slipped way off the bandwagon. And tonight, and need to see those moments, the ups and the downs. So that's what I'm going to share. Take a few minutes to unpack the gear again after packing it up in the auditorium, and then trucking it back to my room, unpacking it, setting it up, doing my own white balance and trying to estimate my own focus, and then record something for you. But it really matters to me. So this is about as raw as it gets, unscripted. This is not produced. And I'm going to share with you kind of what I went through emotionally tonight. I'm just going to change the focus a little bit so you can see me better. I just wanted you to see kind of the room. I'm in my hotel room here. Just trying to get caught up. So I know that it's important to share. For me, I wanted to share my journey, and be vulnerable. And even though I was really tired, and I didn't, I don't have a crew or staff or anything like that. I didn't come back to my room. I just wanted to go to bed. I still need to make my flight arrangements for flying out tomorrow to New York. I've just been too swamped and busy, and anyway, it is what it is. The point of what I want to share with you is slipping off of a path that would lead to my reversal of diabetes, my healing, increase in my vitality and health and weight loss, that I slipped off tonight. And it's strange, the guilt associated with that, especially after 2.5 days of lecture and being surrounded by like-minded people. And understanding all the mechanisms, all the ways that our genes work. They worked for us in a natural environment. They now work against us in a modern environment. And our environment we underestimate its power to affect us, to affect me, to hurt our health, and really be a key component in what is causing the health crisis today: diabetes, obesity, heart attack, stroke, cancer, across the board, And what did I do tonight? after being overwhelmed, at the end of the day, it was 8 o'clock. It's Sunday. I've been working night and day. I've been traveling, 7 days a week, and then my I had my business partner, who's dealing with all of the marketing distribution side. I answered my Voxer messages, and I just got dumped a whole bunch of how much of this, when is this, how many of this, who are this, what is this, when's this going to be done, what's the list of this, is this deep enough, what's the it's just, that was it, man. I just snapped. I'm like, I'm one person. I'm 120 pounds overweight. I've got diabetic neuropathy, pinprick tests up to my knees. I've got second, third degree burns on my toes that aren't healing like they should, because I keep staying on my feet, even with these boots. Maybe these boots the only thing that's saving me, but still, they weigh about 5 pounds. I'm just tired from carrying those around. So the 120 pounds is like 3 5-gallon water bottles carrying around, and then when I carry all this gear, probably another 2 water bottles. So here I am complaining, but I'm being real. This is just what I'm feeling. And then I got all of that pressure from the project, and I'm thinking to myself, can I even do this? I even have the energy? Am I even the personality type? Maybe I'm just going to be a statistic. I'm someone that can't do it. That just doesn't ever make that 100% switch in their mind where there's no other option to eat except what is clearly laid out as the most healthy and fastest way. The slow fast way, as I learned Dr. Doug Lyle explain, of reversing chronic disease, reversing diabetes, reversing obesity, increasing energy, health in a long-term sustainable way as a life in a natural way. And here I am with all that knowledge, just stepping into my own grave. So what's wrong with me? I'm broken. Why would I do something so stupid? Why don't I care for myself? Why don't I love myself enough? Because I heard all this stuff this weekend, the self-love, the health, the nutrition, and how we underestimate our environment, that our environment is critical in helping us navigate this path to health, and making choices of eating from the garden instead of eating from the factory. And what did I do? Man, I got those messages with the pressure of this project, and I'm just one person, and I couldn't do it all. I didn't have the answers. And I went out to eat at this fine Italian restaurant in this hotel. And just like Dr. Goldhammer talks about bread, about how tempting bread is. I did the 2-basket thing, of course. I ate 1 basket, then I'm waiting for the guy to come around impatiently and get a second basket of bread. Of course, that comes with a second plate of butter and a second bowl of olive oil and black pepper and herbs and spices, which I subsequently consumed. And I realized I was not eating for nourishment, for food. Man, I felt like a smoker, the way I would, and I don't smoke, but the way I envisioned smokers feeling when, they're kind of got an edge to them, and they go out and they just take that puff or that chew or whatever the nicotine is. And they just feel like, okay, that's good. That's exactly the way I felt eating that meal. I started to feel that just for ordering the meal, eating it, and even, afterwards, quite a little bit afterwards. It's just now, maybe an hour later, I'm starting to feel what the effects are, my knowledge, the guilt, the shame associated with it, especially having to gather up the energy to unpack all my stuff, set up the camera and the lights, and test the sound, and go back and forth and get everything set up to record my journey for you. I'm not complaining about that. I'm saying that just to let you know that I'm just like you. There's nothing super human about me. In fact, I probably have the worst personality to try to stick with this program. Eat from the garden. How hard can that be? But it turns out food addiction is a real thing, and I feel ashamed to even admit to it, but I could just look at my behavior, and if I was standing outside looking at how I act, I'm using the food. That whole experience tonight was a drug, Now that I'm more aware, it felt like a drug. It felt good. But I know now with the knowledge that I have, what is now going on inside my body, what the olive oil is doing to the endothelial lining of my blood vessels, which is adding more danger to my neuropathy and my open wounds on my toes from the burn. It's adding to the neuropathy of my hands. It is slowed down. The saturated fat has slowed down. I've seen the videos of the arterial pathways. It just see the red blood vessels just slow down, and that means less blood is going to get down there to my feet to heal. My immune system is going to get knocked back, and I've done this horrible self-destructive thing, because of a craving. And I even learned today what's scientifically behind the craving, and what would happen if I indulged. It would reinforce that.
I'm Dr. Dean Ornish. I'm a clinical professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and I'm also founder and president of the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute. For the last 40 years, I've directed a series of randomized controlled trials and demonstration projects showing how powerful simple changes in diet and lifestyle can be. Eat well, move more, stress less, love more. And specifically, a whole foods plant-based diet that's naturally low in refined carbs like sugar and white flour, as well as in fat. Various stress management techniques, including meditation and yoga. Moderate exercise, like walking a half an hour a day. And what we call psychosocial support, which is really love and intimacy. People often have a hard time believing that these simple changes can make such a powerful difference, but they often do. And in our 4 decades of research, we've shown that these simple lifestyle changes can not only prevent, but even reverse the progression of the most common chronic diseases. We started with coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity. Can slow, stop, reverse the progression of men with early stage prostate cancer and by extension breast cancer in women. The more diseases we look at, the more underlying biological mechanisms we study, the more reasons we have to explain why these simple lifestyle changes are so powerful and how quickly they can occur. For example, we found that when you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes. Over 500 genes change in just 3 months, turning on the good genes that keep us healthy, down-regulating or turning off the genes, particularly the genes that cause chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, that are at the root of so many illnesses, as well as down-regulating the genes that are called oncogenes that cause prostate, breast, and colon cancer. We did a study where we also found, in collaboration with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres and telomerase, the enzyme that repairs and lengthens our telomeres, which are the ends of our chromosomes that really regulate how long we live. As we get older, our telomeres get shorter, and as our telomeres get shorter, our lives tend to get shorter, and the premature risk of virtually all chronic diseases goes up proportionate to that. We found that these same simple lifestyle changes could actually lengthen telomeres, in a sense beginning to reverse aging at a cellular level. Now, this is particularly seen with type 2 diabetes, which is really not only epidemic but pandemic around the world, as other countries start to eat like us and live like us and all too often die like us. In the US, 12 to 14% of people are diabetic today. Half the population is diabetic or pre-diabetic at a cost of over $325 billion and going up exponentially. Now, it turns out that lifestyle changes are not only as good, but even better than drugs at preventing type 2 diabetes. It turns out that lifestyle changes are not only as good, but in many ways better than drugs at preventing type 2 diabetes. The landmark diabetes prevention program that David Nathan and others published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that simple lifestyle changes were actually better than the drug, better than a control group at preventing type 2 diabetes. But it seems that lifestyle changes are actually better than drugs at treating type 2 diabetes. There were two major studies that looked at the question, if we control blood sugar really tightly with drugs, will this help prolong life and help reduce the premature death from diabetes? And will this help prevent the horrible complications of diabetes, the blindness and amputations and kidney failure and impotence and heart attacks and strokes and so on? Well, the Navigator and the Accord studies found that actually the premature death was increased, and it wasn't nearly as good at preventing the horrible complications and side effects of diabetes as getting your blood sugar down with diet and lifestyle. So the good news is that these simple lifestyle changes are so powerful and how quickly they can occur at not only preventing but even treating and even reversing the progression of type 2 diabetes. It's one of the reasons, because so many of these diseases, even though we tend to think of them as being different, heart disease and prostate cancer and diabetes, but in fact they share so many common underlying biological mechanisms. That's why these same simple lifestyle changes are so powerful in such a variety of chronic conditions, because they share so many common underlying biological mechanisms in common. So I often ask people that I work with, like, why do you want to live longer? Because there's this common assumption that, well, of course you want to live longer, but not everybody does. The other real epidemic in our culture is depression and loneliness. And telling somebody who's really depressed that they're going to live longer, they say, well, you don't get it. I'm not sure I want to get through the day. And a lot of times these chronic diseases go together with depression, because both depression increases your risk of these diseases, and when you have a chronic disease, you're more likely to be depressed. So it's very easy to get into a downward spiral. And one of the worst things about depression is you feel like you're seeing things clearly for the first time, that all the times you ever thought you'd be happy or healthy or things would go well, you were just fooling yourself, and now you're really seeing things clearly. That's really one of the hallmarks of depression, is a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. Like, things are bad, they're always going to be bad, they're never going to get better. Why not just jump off the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever? And that's part of the power of darkness, is to obscure the fact that you really do have a choice. And I know that from my own personal experience, because when I was 19, I was profoundly and suicidally depressed and came about that close to doing myself in. But I didn't, fortunately, and so many people are in that situation. And so I've learned that it's not enough to just focus on behaviors. It's not enough to just give people information. We have to work at a deeper level. And the underlying theme of all of my work for the last 40 years is a very simple question. What's the cause? What's really behind this? And if we just literally or figuratively bypass it without treating the cause, the problem tends to come back again, or you get a whole new set of problems. But what we're learning is that the cause is often not just the behaviors and not just the information, but what am I feeling, And telling somebody who's lonely and depressed to quit smoking, for example, or change their diet, they say, hey, you don't get it. These behaviors are helping me, deal with my pain. I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes. They're always there for me, and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or food fills that void. Or a well-known food writer said, fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain. Or alcohol numbs the pain. Or other drugs numb the pain. We have an opioid epidemic now. This is just symptomatic of the chronic depression and anxiety and pain that so many people are experiencing. Or people work all the time is another way of dealing with it. A little more socially constructive, but people work, 90 to 100 hours a week, and then they have problems that develop from that. Or video games is another way, or surfing the internet, or whatever. So what I've learned is that we need to focus on the deeper issues. And fear is not really a sustainable motivator. I mean, for a few weeks, if you found out you've just been diagnosed with diabetes or you've just had a heart attack, you'll do pretty much anything your doctor says for maybe a month or two. And then it's hard to sustain that because, I mean, we all know we're going to die, but it's too scary to think about. So who wants to think about the fact that we're going to die or something terrible like blindness or amputations are going to happen? So we tune that out. And so I found that while fear of dying is not a very sustainable motivator, joy of living is, and a sense of meaning is. So I ask people, why do you want to live longer? They say, oh, no one's ever asked me that before. It's like, oh, I don't know. I want to live longer because I want to watch my kids grow up. I want to dance at their wedding. I want to, make love with my spouse. I want to go back to work. I want to do something meaningful in the world. When you can focus on those intentions, it's much easier than the behaviors generally will follow that. If you just focus on the behaviors, the information, I mean, nobody who smokes thinks it's good for them. It's on every pack of cigarettes. So, if you go to Heathrow Airport and you see the duty-free shops and they think, well, if we can just scare people enough, like make it so gross, like let's have big pictures on the cartons of cigarettes of people with tracheotomies or have their face removed or whatever. But again, that doesn't work. My father was a dentist and he'd come to our school and show slides of people with oropharyngeal cancer or have their face removed or whatever, say, don't smoke, kids. And it'd be so scary that people would make fun of it and they go out and have a cigarette afterwards, What's sustainable is joy and pleasure and freedom and love. And if you feel like you're freely choosing to do this, if you feel like this is going to really improve the quality of your life, not just help prevent something bad from happening down the road, I think more clearly, I have energy, I look better, I look younger, I lose weight, I have better sex, I sleep better at night, I can think more multidimensionally. These are the things that really make a difference. And you'll probably live longer too, but again, who wants to live longer if you're not enjoying life? So I think we first have to change the terms of the debate, from the people who say, oh, if I knew the only way you get to live to be 100 is by not doing the things that make you want to live to be 100. That's just wrong. I mean, I have more fun now than I ever did when I was eating meat, because I can do things so much better. And you don't have to wait long to see the benefit. I mean, some studies have shown that, even a single meal that's high in animal protein and fat and so on reduces blood flow to your brain, reduces blood flow to your sexual organs. One study found that men who had a meat-based meal had 30% fewer erections at night and 10% less heart erections than the next day when they had a plant-based meal. I mean, you don't have to wait long to see the benefit. People who have chest pain due to heart disease, we find that they generally become pain-free within days to weeks, even before the blockages have a chance to become less clogged. It's amazing how dynamic these biological mechanisms are in both directions, for better and for worse. So it's not about just living longer, it's about living better. And you'll probably live longer too, but it can't just be about living longer or fear of preventing something bad. It's what you gain is so much more than what you give up. And because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, most people feel so much better so quickly, it really reframes the reason for making these changes from fear of dying or fear of something really bad happening, which is not sustainable, to joy and pleasure and meaning and feeling good, which really are.
I choose a new lifestyle. I choose to thrive. If you're struggling to find hope, your struggle is over. I invite you to join me if you would. Become an active part of this community as we learn from each other and create an I Thrive lifestyle. Thank you to everyone that is engaged in our community. Your comments of insight and support have inspired me to continue this mission as my life purpose. A special thanks for those that have taken that extra step and decided to support our mission and join our movement. I really look forward to meeting you very soon. I can't wait to share this final episode with you tomorrow either. The Thrivers and their stories to be inspired by. Thank you for your time and attention. May you thrive.